Imagine being abandoned as an orphan only to single-handedly acquire immense power by becoming the strongest king to ever live. But having climbed the ranks and laid waste to countless innocent lives, you're assassinated. Fortunately, you're reborn into a new world filled with magic and a loving family where you have the freedom to rewrite your wrongs and live the life you've always wanted. The anime opens with our MC, Gray, finally acquiring the title of Strongest King, having slain hundreds and massacred various nations to show off his dominance. But he was always on edge and very lonely at the top. One day, whilst admiring his achievements, Gray is suddenly assassinated, sent sinking into an abyss, only to be given a second chance at life. Being reborn before his new parents, Gray lays eyes on Alice Lewin and Reynold Lewin, sharing his mother's eyes, his father's hair, and bestowed the new name Arthur Lewin. Now in the body of a toddler, Arthur can't help but allow his new parents to take care of him, unable to control this new body of his. One day, Arthur witnesses his father Reynold empowering his fist with magic, only to shatter a boulder to impress Alice. When Reynold is injured from showing off, Alice showed that she was capable of healing magic, skills that never existed in Arthur's previous life. Heading into the nearby forest, Reynold dons his battle gear, only to enchant his body, allowing him to easily take down a bull attacking him. As Reynold heads home from his hunt, Arthur reasons he should learn more about this world as fast as possible, especially since people are allowed to own armor and weapons. Reynold admits he is quite beat up, seeing as it's been a while since he's gone hunting, but as Arthur admires his new comfy life, he remembers a time when people would attack him in his sleep, forcing Arthur to constantly stay on edge in his previous life. As some time passes by, we see Arthur able to crawl on his own, pleasing his parents as they watch Arthur adorably appear in front of a mirror. Being the first time he's seen his own reflection, Arthur admits he's still not used to his new life. But being placed to sleep for his usual nap by Alice, Arthur waits until the coast is clear. Springing out of his crib, Arthur uses his bedding to slide onto the floor safely, quietly crawling past his mother, who is doing the dishes, only to enter the study room in his house. Taking out a book, Arthur gets to work learning about this new world, seeing as knowledge is power. Arthur reads that the continent where he resides is known as Dicathan and houses 3 kingdoms. First is the Darv Kingdom, the nation of dwarves that live underground. Next is the Elenwar Kingdom, home to elves that reside in the forest. Finally is the Sapin Kingdom, where humans live and is the most inhabited out of the 3 kingdoms. Arthur learns that the kingdom is also a monarchy like his previous world, but the throne seems to be inherited and not fought over, unlike in his previous life. Taking out another book, Arthur realizes his current world is quite undeveloped, reading that his current world runs on a power called magic, and magic uses mana to activate certain skills. Apparently, the ability to cast spells is hereditary, and only 1 in 100 people end up manifesting such powers that allow one to augment or conjure. Augmenting magic involves someone enhancing their body, ultimately boosting the caster's strength, defense, and agility, whereas conjuring magic is the projection of spells. Arthur does wonder what Alice's magic is, seeing as healing magic doesn't fit into either category. But Arthur hears that the key to controlling mana is dependent on one's mana core. Most spellcasters start casting spells from the start of puberty to their late teens, and it's the channeling of one's mana into their mana core that determines a mage's mastery over their magic. Arthur recognizes the concept to be similar to Ki, the power he used in his previous life to conjure internal power and manifest that internal power into external strength. Focusing in, Arthur begins searching for his mana core, preparing to pump it with mana. But suddenly Alice picks up Arthur, having been searching for him. Pausing, Alice suddenly notices something strange about Arthur. But upon further inspection, Alice realizes Arthur needs his nappy changed. Although Arthur is embarrassed, he states he'll continue to work hard. Moving forward in time 2 years, where we see Alice detailing Arthur's upbringing. Alice writes that Arthur is definitely a curious child, having never seen Arthur smile once since he was born. But as Alice glances outside, she sees Reynold teaching Arthur how to swing a sword. Instantly, Alice confronts Reynold, demanding to know why their 2-year-old child is practicing sword swings. But Arthur notes down that Alice is far scarier than Reynold himself. Taking Arthur into town, Alice notices Arthur enjoying walking around. But Arthur states he can use the time to visit stores and learn more about their nation's technology. Stopping in front of a store filled with crystals, Arthur watches the store clerk show off some fire magic, cutting to later that evening where Alice carries the sleepy Arthur home. Arthur is grateful that his parents are taking care of his every need, having never felt such warmth before, especially since Arthur was an orphan in his previous life, yearning to be part of a family like other kids his age. As Alice puts Arthur to sleep, she reveals that she knows Arthur frequently slips out of bed to read, happy to see that Arthur gets his curiosity from Reynold. But Alice wishes that Arthur would enjoy his youth whilst he still can. With some more time passing, Arthur watches over his dad channeling mana into his core, only to upheave several stones. Although the spell wasn't the most impressive, Alice asks Arthur to continue watching, amazing Arthur when Reynold fires off a torrential punch followed by an earth-shaking axe kick. Seeing as his father is an augmenter, Arthur is suddenly whisked away by Alice, who says it's time for Arthur to have his nap, but Arthur wants to read instead. Putting on his puppy dog eyes, Arthur manages to charm his mother into giving him some time to read, choosing to spend the time perfecting his mana core as Arthur continues to compress mana towards his core. As Alice brings some refreshments for Reynold, they suddenly hear a massive explosion go off in the house, forcing Reynold to tackle Alice's side, protecting Alice from the explosion. Alice cries that Arthur is still in the house, prompting them both to rush into the house, only to be shocked to see Arthur floating in the air. Reynold states that Arthur had created his mana core before he was even 3 years old. But as Arthur proudly faces his parents, he suddenly spots planks of wood falling towards him. With Arthur attempting to leap out of the way, he's suddenly protected by his parents who leap in front of the falling wood, surprising Arthur as he suddenly sees Alice and Reynold breaking into tears, both relieved that their baby boy is safe. Flashing back, Arthur remembers a time when he had humiliated his opponent in battle, but strangely enough his opponent's parents still consoled their son. In the present, Arthur begins to feel an emotion he's never felt before, suddenly crying as well as he wonders how much he's changed since living this new life. Flashing back, we see Arthur in his previous life, confronting a captured emissary for attempting to assassinate Arthur. Having failed, Arthur's council had declared that the emissary and his family will be banished and will all be punished. But out of nowhere, the emissary's wife and child called out to him. Seeing his loved ones present, the emissary had begged Arthur to spare his family and only punish him. But as the emissary pleads to Arthur, Arthur swiftly slays the emissary's wife and child, something Arthur considered quite reasonable as he had spared the wife and child from future torture, unlike the traitorous emissary. In the present, we see Reynold asking Arthur if he would like to use the same gear as him. But Arthur is more interested in using a wooden sword to train. As Reynold agrees to spar Arthur with a wooden sword, Arthur rushes his father, both exchanging equal blows, but suddenly Arthur notices Reynold igniting his blade with magic. With a single glance, Arthur mimics the technique, this time slowly pushing Reynold back as the duel ends with Arthur's victory, having decimated Reynold's blade only to grin from ear to ear at his accomplishment. Entering the house, Arthur hears Reynold suggesting to Alice that they get Arthur a teacher, seeing as Arthur is clearly a gifted child, but Alice states that she can teach Arthur magic. Sadly, Reynold says Alice's magic is unconventional. Plus, Reynold points out that Arthur at the age of 4 was able to cut through his reinforced blade like it was nothing. Although Alice is amazed at his son's power, she still refuses to allow Arthur to be sent away, infuriating Reynold. Reynold states that Arthur can truly grow up to be someone amazing if his talents were honed, but Alice stands firm, stating that their little boy shouldn't leave their parents' side at such a young age. As a compromise, Arthur suggests that they all move together instead of Arthur leaving alone, something that excites Reynold and Alice as they immediately begin to pack, excited for the journey ahead. The next day, 2 carriages arrive in front of the home, people Arthur knows as Reynolds and Alice's former party, the Twin Horn Party. Apparently, they helped rebuild the house when Arthur had first awakened his core, greeting Adam Crinch, only to be pulled in for a tight hug by Angela Rose. Luckily, Durden Walker saves Arthur from being suffocated by melons, only to spot Jasmine Flamesworth glaring at him from above a carriage. Finally, Helen Shard welcomes Arthur, all boarding the carriages only to immediately head out. Seeing the carriages being pulled along by monsters, Arthur notes how primitive the transportation are, a stark difference from the floating vehicles in his old world. Regardless, the gang take a break in a forest, having set their destination to be the city of Xyrus. But as the party sit by a fire to relax, they suddenly spot monsters approaching their camp. In an instant, the party ready their weapons, all watching as the monsters pounce onto Jasmine. In mere moments, Jasmine spearheads the counterattack by carving through the monsters, only for Adam and Reynolds to back her up, leaving Helen to snipe them from afar with her bow. Arthur notes how Jasmine, Adam, Reynolds, and Helen are all augmenters, but Durden and Angela are conjurers, having assisted with spells, something that inspires Arthur to grow stronger. As night falls, the gang feast on the monster corpses, all stuffing themselves full only for Alice to notice Reynolds is still injured. Interestingly enough, the party chooses to stand guard, all whilst Alice begins healing Reynolds. But Arthur hears that Alice is considered an emitter mage with healing magic. Apparently, emitters with healing magic are very rare, explaining why the party members are very protective of Alice. Plus, it explains why Alice and Reynolds were living in the countryside where not many people could uncover and target Alice for her powers. With Alice finishing up patching up Reynolds, Adam asks for permission to spar Arthur for a bit, all watching as Adam retrieves his wrapped spear, exciting the onlookers. Arthur wonders how he'll compare to a trained fighter like Adam, but as the duel starts, both Adam and Arthur ignite their weapons. But surprisingly, Arthur chooses to physically enhance his legs as well. Rushing Adam, Arthur appears in front of Adam, but before Adam can react, Arthur blinks behind Adam, accidentally slipping as he's not used to his body. When Adam turns to clash weapons with Arthur, Adam's strength blows Arthur back and knocks his blade out of his hand, but luckily Angela steps in to catch Arthur from falling, ending the duel in Adam's favor. The gang all scold Adam for attacking Arthur with his full strength, but Adam states he was frightened at Arthur's monstrous speed. As Arthur catches his breath, he suddenly notices Jasmine has snuck up on him, asking to know how Arthur reinforced his feat and enchanted his blade at the same time. Seeing as Jasmine won't back down, we cut forward in time where the gang are proceeding as planned, all making sure to stop for breaks, where we see Adam giving Arthur pointers on how to fight. As for the others, Reynolds is seen doing push-ups with Arthur, only for Helen to give Arthur private lessons on how to fire a bow. Finally, Jasmine is seen racing Arthur to test their speeds. That night, Arthur is seen reading a book, but gets weirded out seeing Jasmine watching him. As time passes by, Arthur notes how caring Jasmine has been towards him, even giving Arthur a birthday present as a thanks for all Arthur has taught her. Jasmine begins explaining the gift to House, not only a rope but doubles up as a blade, something the other girls find adorable seeing as Jasmine is normally closed off to others. But as the gang prepare to continue their journey, Arthur suddenly spots Alice acting strange, worried seeing as Alice utters it's nothing. As the gang ride their carriages through some mountainous terrain, their carriages are suddenly halted by some bandits. With several arrows stopping their escape, Adam and Durden rush to scout the area, but they realize they're completely surrounded. The leader of the bandits orders for the capture of Alice and Arthur, but the others can be slaughtered, something that disgusts Arthur. As the bandits start their attack, we see several men sliding down from the mountain, only to be met by a massive fireball from Durden that stalls the attackers. Next, Reynolds tries carving through as many bandits as possible, but fails to spot an attacker sneaking up from behind. Luckily, Helen snipes the attacker, prompting Adam and Jasmine to assist with the defenses, but Arthur is worried that the party will burn out soon. With some time passing by, we see the bandits continue to swarm the carriages, exhausting the gang as they're clearly growing fatigued. When Reynolds is tossed into a carriage, Arthur and Alice rush to check on him, But Reynold cries that he is fine and that Alice should keep her healing magic concealed. Reynold orders Arthur to drag Alice away from their location. But Arthur states he wants to stay and fight, but suddenly Reynold reveals that Alice is currently carrying another child. Arthur realizes that Alice's strange behavior in the past few days was because she was pregnant, something that finally convinces him to drag Alice to safety, all whilst Reynold keeps the leader of the bandits occupied. As Arthur runs into some bandits blocking his path, he is grateful for the party members clearing a path for him and Alice, finding it ironic how he has slain so many innocents in his past life, yet right now, he is begging for his own family to be spared. Right on cue, a bandit atop the mountains is seen casting a wind spell to knock out our duo. But having detected the spell, Arthur decides to shove Alice away from the blast zone, tanking the blast himself. With Arthur being flung off the mountain into the forest below, Arthur uses the rope and his dagger to snatch the mage and drag him down as well, watching as Angela and Durden attempt to rescue Arthur with their magic, but no luck. Arthur says he strangely feels fulfilled, finally realizing why someone would go so far to save a loved one. But sadly, Arthur's one regret is how he won't get to experience what it's like to be a big brother. Deep in the forest below the mountain, we see Arthur awaken in a mist-filled terrain, surprised he had survived, but horrifically Arthur is greeted by a disturbing monster. Having moved over into a cave, Arthur and the creature stare at each other. But as Arthur rushes to attack the monster, it waves off Arthur's attacks. The monster says it isn't here to hurt Arthur, surprising Arthur seeing as it knows his name. But out of nowhere, the monster heads over to some fruits growing in the cave, carefully plucking them for Arthur to eat. Arthur is confused at what is happening, but having survived the fall barely, Arthur's wounds finally catch up to him and he begins to bawl crying. The monster orders Arthur to eat and recover, something Arthur happily does as the monster watches Arthur adorably stuff his face, promising to answer any questions afterwards. Arthur starts by asking if the monster knows how his parents are doing, prompting the monster to reveal that they're locked in place. But using a magic spell, the monster shows the aftermath of the bandits' attack, happy to report that the Twin Horn party had successfully fended off the attackers, and it's been several days since they left the scene. Hearing the good news, Arthur can't help but shed tears of joy, hearing that the monster before him is called Sylvia. Cutting elsewhere, we see two mysterious figures speaking to each other near a blue lake, only to cut back to Arthur, who continues to recover in the cave alongside Sylvia, lovingly feeding and watching over Arthur as he sleeps. Although Arthur is recovering as the time passes, Arthur had heard from Sylvia that they're currently located on the edge of the Elshire Forest, where dangerous animals and outlaws roam the land. Sylvia does offer to create a breach in space to help Arthur bypass the danger. Happy to see Arthur is now able to move and fight, but Arthur does wonder why Sylvia is taking care of him in the first place, wondering what object Sylvia is protecting and whether or not Sylvia is injured. As Arthur continues to train, he takes some time to further develop his mana core, impressing Sylvia as she shows off a spell. Arthur immediately notices Sylvia creating a ball of energy while simultaneously gathering mana from the air to fuel it, a technique Arthur never knew was possible. Sylvia utters that humans tend to separate the use of gathering and using mana from magic, something magical beasts normally combine. Sylvia offers to teach Arthur how to use the same technique she just showed off, piquing Arthur's interest, but Sylvia states that such a technique will be guaranteed to make Arthur stronger, demanding to know what Arthur intends to do with such power. Thinking about his loved ones getting hurt, Arthur declares he'll use his power to slay those who oppose him. But instantly Sylvia flicks Arthur away. Sylvia says Arthur gave her the wrong answer, plus his twisted face disgusts her. But Arthur is confused since in his previous life, he became the strongest king by obtaining unrivaled power. Sylvia apologizes for hitting Arthur, but upon touching Arthur with one of her fingers, Sylvia reminds Arthur she could easily shred Arthur in an instant. Arthur admits she prefers the more gentle Sylvia, only to hear that rage and anger burns easily, and when someone acts out violence, they feel good in the moment. But this only breeds more hatred and violence. Sylvia asks Arthur not to waste away his new life, making Arthur wonder if she knows about his past life. But as Sylvia asks Arthur once more what he'll do with his new profound power, Arthur correctly answers he'll protect his loved ones with it. With Sylvia satisfied, we cut elsewhere where we see a monster tracking down Sylvia's whereabouts, having slaughtered all who got in its way. Flashing back, we see Arthur in his previous life waking up, only to be greeted by his servants who divert their eyes in fear of Arthur's presence. As Arthur admires his self-portrait, he states that a king is meant to start wars and gather glory for his nation, something his advisor Marlin agrees with. In the present, Arthur begins to control his ability to absorb mana whilst using it, focusing in carefully all while Sylvia watches over him. Arthur utters that in his past life, he had been blessed with immense power in the form of his key control, and his powers allowed him to defeat all who opposed him. Having calmed himself, Arthur manages to find the perfect balance between the opposing techniques, perfectly controlling his input and output, only to excitedly test out his new body. As Arthur runs over to show Sylvia, Sylvia suddenly smacks Arthur aside, asking Arthur to keep quiet and hide. From the darkness, the monster tracking Sylvia appears in the cave, confusing Arthur as the creature looks exactly like Sylvia. The monster says it found Sylvia by following her blood trail, demanding that Sylvia come with it. But when Sylvia refuses, the monster fires off a dark projectile that Sylvia is barely able to block. Falling to her knees, Sylvia is clearly very weak, reminded by the monster that she has little time to live. Before Arthur can intervene, Sylvia reassures Arthur she is fine, making use of the remainder of her life force to transform into a pure white dragon. As Sylvia fires off a beam attack, the monster swiftly defends, retaliating with several projectiles of its own, ultimately massacring the surrounding cave. But Sylvia is more focused on ensuring Arthur is not hurt. Seeing the monster charging up a devastating attack, Sylvia has no choice but to activate her trump card, suddenly freezing time before the monster's attack can reach her. With only Sylvia and Arthur unaffected, Sylvia reveals her draconic status to Arthur, quickly opening up a rift in space to help Arthur escape. Sylvia confirms that Arthur will use his newfound powers to protect the weak, but Arthur can't help but notice Sylvia all bloodied from her battle. Depressed, he is powerless to help her. Sylvia does choose to give Arthur some parting gifts, starting off by handing an egg wrapped in her feather, asking Arthur to take good care of it. Next, Sylvia marks Arthur with some strange symbols that run up both of his arms, stating that everything will make sense in due time. Seeing as it's time to say goodbye, Sylvia apologizes, seeing as she could have sent Arthur away from the very beginning. But Sylvia wanted to spend time with Arthur and watch him grow, something that makes Arthur tremble seeing as he can't protect Sylvia. Sylvia says this departure was destined to happen, prompting Arthur to cry out that he considers Sylvia his family, just like a grandmother figure, something that hits deep with Sylvia. Unable to hold open the rift any longer, Sylvia nudges Arthur through the portal. But before Arthur can change his mind, Sylvia closes the gate to ensure Arthur is safe. Now alone with the creature, Sylvia unfreezes time, allowing the devastating attack to land, sending her to the ground. The monster states that the attack shouldn't be lethal, heading over to inspect Sylvia's body. But out of nowhere, Sylvia unleashes another point-blank beam attack that manages to eradicate the surrounding area. Back with Arthur, he's seen traveling through a strange space, reminded by Sylvia's voice to live a fulfilling life and not stray down a hatred-filled path like in his previous life, something that catches Arthur off guard. Hearing Sylvia address him by his former title of King Grey, we cut forward in time where Arthur has successfully escaped the cave, swearing to uphold his promises to Sylvia, but suddenly Arthur detects a presence nearby. Immediately enchanting his legs, Arthur leaps into the trees to get a better view of the people nearby, all whilst remembering to care for his egg. Having made it to the source of the sound, Arthur notices a carriage of bandits restraining an elf girl, watching as the men plan on selling the elf as a slave to earn a fortune. Seeing the men treating the elf so poorly, Arthur grows infuriated, remembering Sylvia's words to protect the weak whilst never resorting to unnecessary violence. Acting smart, Arthur follows after the carriage as it makes its way through the forest, but seeing as the sun has begun to set, the men choose to set up camp and rest for the day. Arthur wonders if the men will give him intel on the nearest human settlement. Overhearing the four men discussing the horrific acts they may do to the elf girl, but calming his anger, Arthur chooses to wait a little longer. With the moon finally rising, Arthur wonders why the forest hounds are obeying the men, realizing that the magic collars must be controlling them. Arthur starts by tossing some acorns at the forest hounds, causing the beast to cry out, but this forces one of the four men to hurry and shush the hounds, fearing their howls will attract other magic beasts. Seeing the man distracted, Arthur equips a magic dagger, instantly appearing behind the man only to silence him. Borrowing the man's blade, Arthur hears a second man approaching, swiftly dispatching him with a neck slice. Seeing as the third man has arrived as well, Arthur makes quick work of him by slashing at his legs. But before he can finish the man off, the fourth man appears, excited to have encountered another mage. The fourth man starts off by empowering his fist, catching Arthur's attention as the man blitzes towards him, smashing the ground beneath Arthur. Although Arthur was able to dodge, Arthur fails to land a single strike on the man, attempting to catch him off guard by tossing out his dagger whilst holding onto the string built into it. But the man easily catches the dagger. Pumped up, the man rushes Arthur with his own dagger, mixing things up by kicking Arthur to surprise him. Seeing Arthur battered up, the man picks Arthur up to inspect his worth, but Arthur takes the chance to set the man's leg on fire. Pissed, the man states he'll simply sell Arthur's corpse, but having been distracted, Arthur manages to retrieve his dagger only to plunge it deep into the fourth man's skull. With only the third man remaining, Arthur ignores his pleas to be spared, wrapping up his fourth kill only to head towards the captured elf. Arthur notices something familiar about the elf girl before him, but having set her free, Arthur takes her outside, telling her she can go home now. The elf girl is worried about Arthur's wounds, but this reminds Arthur that he has never hung out with another kid his age, quickly covering up the corpses of the men as he reasons kids shouldn't be seeing such things. Arthur reassures the elf girl that she is free to go, but before Arthur can leave with the loot he's obtained, the elf grabs a hold of Arthur, unable to tell him she is scared. Arthur utters that he needs to get back to his family, only to hear that the elf before him needs help getting back home, having gotten lost whilst hunting for bugs. Remembering his past life of being isolated and alone as a kid, Arthur agrees to help the elf, but the elf cries they should free the hounds before they leave. Arthur fears that the hounds will go wild once set free, but the elf reassures Arthur that magic beasts are an elf's best friend, pleasantly surprising Arthur when he sees the hounds peacefully leave once set free. Starting their journey together, Arthur learns the elf's name to be Tesha Aerolith, both choosing to take breaks occasionally only for Arthur to feed Tesha to ensure she isn't hungry. Tesha is a little disgusted at the meat soup Arthur made, but Tesha asks why Arthur is currently in the Elshire Forest. Arthur reveals he was separated from his parents, hearing that in Elenoir, the land of the elves, Tesha's parents are normally busy, so Tesha spends time mainly with her grandparents and caretakers. With the journey being longer than expected, Arthur notices some bugs floating around Tesha, hearing that the bugs are what elves use to help mark paths in Elenoir. As the two continue on their path, Tesha says she'll start training with her assigned master once her mana awakens, surprising Arthur as there doesn't seem to be a school system Tesha has to take. Along their path, Arthur takes note of a strange forest hound following them. But as our duo set up camp for the night, they suddenly hear a hound cry throughout the forest. Arthur tells Tesha to rest whilst he stands guard, taking the time alone to inspect the egg Sylvia had given him. Just then, Tesha offers to share her tent with Arthur, but Arthur reassures Tesha he isn't tired, ultimately giving in as Tesha is afraid to be all alone in the tent. As Arthur sits guard, Tesha prepares to sleep, but she takes the chance to call Arthur a pervert, having heard stories of humans with multiple wives. Arthur cries that only aristocrats and nobles would have multiple wives, finally shutting Tesha up as she collapses from exhaustion. With our duo both falling asleep, they awaken the next day, climbing up a waterfall only to help each other pass a lake. Arthur says he still wants to reunite with his family quickly, but out of nowhere Arthur's mana core begins to pulsate, causing immense pain to Arthur. Unable to move, Arthur rests whilst Tesha searches for some herbs, but surprisingly one of the forest hounds they saved has brought a boar to repay Arthur for setting them free. That night, our duo feast on the delectable boar meat, prompting Tesha to feed Arthur some mushrooms she's picked, but this only gives Arthur another stomachache. Settling in for the night, Arthur fights to stay awake, all whilst Tesha recounts tales she heard about humans and dwarves. But as Arthur has fallen asleep first, Tesha heads to bed as well. The next day, Arthur continues to suppress his pain, reassuring Tesha that they've almost arrived in her homeland. But Tesha asks if she can call Arthur Art, especially since they've grown quite close. Since they're friends, Arthur takes the chance to tease Tesha, but noticing a spark in a nearby tree, Arthur realizes they've reached Tesha's home. As our duo head through the tree's gate, they're suddenly teleported to a different location, but out of nowhere, several elven warriors surround Arthur and restrain him, all whilst Tesha watches on. As the guards pin Arthur to the floor, they accuse Arthur of following and taking advantage of Tesha to infiltrate their home. But as Arthur looks to Tesha to clear things up, she coldly glares at him. Arthur realizes he should have never trusted others, wondering if Tesha's innocent girl act was all a ploy to use him, remembering back when he had to slay those closest to him to survive. When the elven guards order for Arthur to be put down, Tesha comes to her senses, rushing to ask the guards to let Arthur go. Seeing Tesha infatuated by Arthur, the guards grow more infuriated at Arthur, but suddenly a voice calls for the guards to stand down. With a green light appearing out of nowhere, an elder-looking elf appears, demanding the guards stand down, allowing Tesha to apologize to Arthur for his brutal treatment. Tesha reveals that the elder before them is her grandpa, the former ruler of the Elenwar kingdom, Virion Aerolith. Virion personally thanks Arthur for returning Tesha to their home, especially since Tesha is the princess of Elenier, something Arthur could have never imagined. Tesha apologizes since she didn't tell Arthur her true status, but suddenly Tesha's parents, King Alduin and Queen Muriel appear, glad Tesha is safe. Alduin demands to know why there is a filthy human in the kingdom, ordering for Arthur to be arrested, but Virion and Tesha vouch for Arthur, stating that he should be rewarded since he rescued a princess. As Tesha prepares to take Arthur to their castle, Virion whispers he'll have a chat with Arthur later, but Arthur can't help but detect Virion's overwhelming aura. Tesha begins escorting Arthur through town, amazing Arthur as he sees various homes plastered amongst the surrounding trees, but sadly a crowd has formed, all glaring at the human boy. Arthur utters that in the past elves and humans weren't the fondest of each other, something that shows as there is clear prejudice against him. But Arthur wonders why Tesha is so accepting of him. Arthur still can't shake off that glare from earlier Tesha gave him, but at the same time Arthur still feels his core throbbing in pain, declaring he'll hold out until everything is over. Having arrived at Tesha's massive mansion, Tesha greets her maids asking that Arthur be treated kindly during his stay, but seeing as the mood is quite sour, Arthur asks if he can explain how they got here. As Tesha and her family gather, Arthur prepares to recount his tales while standing, but Arthur is suddenly asked to sit with everyone, ultimately served some snacks and tea, as asked by Tesha herself. Finally getting down to business, Alduin introduces himself along with Muriel his wife and Virion the former king, prompting Arthur to humbly utter he is from a small town in the Sapin kingdom, remembering to be respectful since he is technically standing before royalty. Alduin is impressed by Arthur's mature attitude, agreeing to listen to how Arthur was separated from his family, choosing to leave out parts regarding Sylvia, only to explain his encounter with the men who attacked Tesha. Immediately, Alduin gets pissed hearing that human traffickers tried capturing his daughter, but Virion is more curious as to how Arthur freed Tesha. Arthur states he simply defeated the traffickers with his magecraft, something that piques Alduin's interest, but the guards nearby refuse to believe a mere child defeated adults, accusing Arthur of lying once more to infiltrate their kingdom. Virion warns his men to back off, followed by Tesha crying that Arthur is telling the truth, But luckily Muriel embraces Tesha, lightening up the mood. Alduin says he believes Arthur, prompting Arthur to ask for his freedom as he needs help reuniting with his family. King Alduin is opposed to helping a human, but Arthur states that not all humans are as terrible as Alduin thinks, something Virion agrees with. Seeing Alduin still stubborn, Tesha gives her father a mean stare, leading Alduin to explain that the teleportation gate to the Sapping Kingdom is only accessible to the Council of 3 Races and is opened every 7 years. As for when the portal will next open, Alduin says it'll take another 5 years, but seeing Arthur distraught, Alduin agrees to have his soldiers escort Arthur home through other means. As Alduin offers Arthur a place to stay for the night, Virion takes note of Arthur's strange attitude, cutting to later that night where Arthur cleans up, all whilst wondering whether this pain in his chest has to do with Sylvia. Heading onto the balcony, Arthur notices Tesha happily reunited with her family, suddenly yearning to reunite with his parents as he wishes they escaped safely. With Arthur choosing to go on a nightly walk, Tesha suddenly catches up to him, apologizing for her father's horrible attitude towards him. But Arthur says it only makes sense since they were worried about Tesha. Arthur asks Tesha if he is worthy of reuniting with his parents, especially since the bandits attacked his family because of him, plus he wasn't able to protect his parents himself. Annoyed, Tesha cries that it's common sense that parents would miss their child, plus Tesha herself admits to missing Arthur once he leaves. Out of nowhere, specks of light fill their surroundings, a feature of fireflies swarming them having been drawn to the surrounding flowers. Seeing Tesha so innocent, Arthur blames his corrupt mind for thinking so badly of the people around him, apologizing to Tesha as he promises to do better moving forward. At that moment, Arthur detects a projectile being launched towards them, blocking the attack only to swiftly enchant his legs as he rushes to kick the attacker. But surprisingly, it's Virion himself. Arthur demands to know why he was being attacked, but Virion utters the projectile was only an optical illusion, declaring that Arthur truly is a capable fighter and his story now makes more sense. Before Tesha can scold her grandpa, Virion says he is quite interested in Arthur's skills, choosing to move Tesha aside as he tosses Arthur a wooden sword. Understanding the situation, Arthur bolts towards Virion, keeping his movements short and concise. But Virion manages to evade each of Arthur's slashes, even after he's enchanted his movements. Choosing to speed up, Arthur's blade clashes with Virion's palm, suddenly shattering the wooden sword as a fragment flies towards Tesha. Reacting fast enough, Arthur throws the remainder of his sword to deflect the projectile, only to resume their fight as both Arthur and Virion both ignite their fist, suddenly clashing with raw strength. Arthur is reminded of clashing with a powerful beast in his past, but as Arthur is blown back by Virion's sheer strength, he quickly recovers, only to rush towards Virion once more, managing to tag Virion's forehead. Virion is amazed Arthur won their duel, but before Virion can announce their second round, Tesha cries for Virion to stop, prompting Virion to offer Arthur to be his apprentice. Arthur states that he can't since he still needs to reunite with his parents. But Virion wonders if Arthur will accept his proposal if his parents know Arthur is fine and well. Before Arthur can ask more, he suddenly collapses onto his knees, clenching onto his chest. Virion says he had suspected Arthur is in possession of a beast will, and only Virion himself can help Arthur from dying, but only if Arthur becomes his apprentice. Having sunken into a dark abyss, Arthur suddenly feels a pain rupture from his chest only to give rise to a dark entity Arthur fears is his traumas. But before Arthur can be consumed by his dark thoughts, he is awoken by Tesha. Arthur is relieved it was only a nightmare, annoying Tesha as she says Virion is waiting for Arthur, but rolling out of bed Arthur begins to get changed. Tesha hears that Arthur may be staying with them for a little while longer, but Arthur teases Tesha by calling her princess, asking her to leave so he can change. As the duo head outside, they notice Alduin and Muriel, reminding Virion that humans aren't allowed to live amongst elves as it goes against tradition. But Virion says he's taken a liking to Arthur. As Virion boards a carriage, Tesha tries arguing with her father, But Virion hurries our duo into the carriage as well, all traveling off to visit a friend of Virion's. Viron is amused seeing as Arthur has begun to call him Gramps, but seeing as Tesha has fallen asleep, Virion reveals that Tesha had intentionally woken up early to follow Arthur. Viron feels sorry for Tesha, seeing as she is the sole heir to the throne and hence has been quite lonely. Plus, in the past, many of her so-called friends had left her, meaning she doesn't open up as much anymore. Virion says he has seen Tesha smiling more often when she is around Arthur, personally thanking Arthur for being Tesha's first true friend, something that surprises Arthur as a powerful man like Virion is thanking a mere child like himself. Having traveled for a while, the trio stop, intriguing Arthur to who Virion's mysterious friend is, but out of nowhere Virion kicks on his friend's house, crying for them to come out. As a few seconds pass by, an older woman opens the doors, demanding that Virion not be so loud, only to be introduced as Renia Darkassa, a unique sorcerer. Arthur wonders if Renia has unique magic like his mother's healing magic, immediately entering Renia's home as Arthur takes note of the abundance of books in Renia's home. Arthur wonders how Renia can help him, sitting down only to learn that Renia is a diviner, a person that can see the past and future. Renia knows that Arthur isn't here to have his fortune read, amused that Arthur only wants to make contact with his parents. Seeing such childish innocence in Arthur, Renia asks Arthur to lean into a bucket of water, asking Arthur to picture his parents as she casts a spell over him. Arthur starts off by picturing his mother and father at a table, both sitting down to enjoy some stew, both getting depressed as stew was Arthur's favorite food, and it's supposed to be Arthur's birthday today. Apparently, after the bandits were defeated, the Twin Horn Party had no choice but to stop Reynold and Alice from chasing after Arthur, forced to board their carriage and continue on their journey. Not long after, Reynold and Alice separated from the others, only to acquire a home with their status where they await their next child's birth. Before his parents can break into tears, Arthur begins speaking to them with Renia's help, reassuring his parents that he'll return home once his body is treated, plus the elves in the Elenoir Kingdom are treating him well. Since Virion fulfilled his end of the bargain, Arthur declares he'll be Virion's apprentice moving forward. But as they all head home, Alduin still questions if a human boy should be amongst elves. Tesha says it wouldn't look good for her savior to be shooed away. Plus, Virion himself says he'll take responsibility for anything that happens moving forwards. Having finally changed their minds, both Alduin and Muriel accept Arthur as a friend, something Arthur realizes is thanks to both Tesha and Virion's convincing. To celebrate, Tesha takes Arthur into town, impressing Arthur as it is his first time seeing elven vendors. As Tesha drags Arthur toward the sweet stand, Arthur accidentally bumps into an elven kid. But when he turns to apologize, the elven kid along with their friends begin mocking Arthur for being a human. Arthur is not fazed at all by the kid's insults. Noticing Ferith Ivsar II attempting to escort Tesha away from him, Arthur begins to scheme, first intentionally calling Ferith by the wrong name. With Ferith now agitated, Arthur excuses himself from the situation, something Tesha praises Arthur for doing, but refusing to be embarrassed, Ferith challenges Arthur to a duel. Tesha reminds Ferith that a duel isn't something to be taken so lightly, but Ferith says he is simply defending his honor, something that confuses Arthur as he wonders what is so important about a duel. Seeing as a crowd has formed, Arthur has no choice but to accept, leaving Tesha to officiate the duel. With both challengers ready, Tesha starts the duel, prompting Ferith to rush Arthur with a punch, but sadly Arthur fires off a punch faster, knocking Ferith to the ground and ending the duel. Seeing as things have been settled, our duo continue enjoying their free time, munching on some snacks, spending time reading only to shop around. As our duo admire the scenery for a bit, Tesha asks what's on Arthur's mind, but Arthur says it's nothing. Tesha asks if Arthur is ready for his training with Virion tomorrow, reminding Arthur of Virion's warning. As Beast Tamers is a role Arthur should be cautious of trying to obtain. Virion had asked Arthur to focus and survive for as long as he can. That way he can reunite with his family, something that excites Arthur as he can finally get stronger for his family. inspiring Tesha to get stronger as well. With the big day arriving, we see Arthur and Virion begin his brutal training. But as we flash forward 3 years into the future, we see an older-looking Tesha waking up Arthur, even forced to use some mana when Arthur refuses to leave his bed.